So our final speaker is part of the group. We have Don Berchoff from True Weather. For those that were here last year, I think we can all agree that Don provided the most passionate speech last year. So we're looking forward to what Don's coming up with today, where he's going to discuss the provision of weather services. So over to you, Don.
Well, thank you very much. Just looking for the slides to come up. Oh, I have to. Right arrow. There we go. Up. Back one. Yeah, I'm Don Berchoff, True Weather Solutions CEO. I have about 40 years in the aviation, logistics, and weather business. Started my career back in the 1980s before we had satellite data, forecasting for missions across the Atlantic Ocean for the military, bringing fighters, brand new F-16s with one engine across the Atlantic to do exercises in Europe or in Japan, in the Pacific. And I used to fly with those, with air crews. Because we had such a lack of weather information, they needed us on the airplane to make sure that if we couldn't refuel that fighter jet who had one engine in every AR track, every air refueling track, we had to get them off someplace for an alternate quickly so that they don't crash into the water. And there was times in that era that we have the same problem we have today. We don't have enough data. And there was one time when they were going, they were about 3/4 across the Atlantic, and my alternates, all the alternates in the UK went bad because the winds were supposed to be blowing at about 290 at 25 knots, gusts to 40, but that was okay because it was down the runway. And if you've ever looked at flight charts for the UK, most of the runways have a west-east component. So I started looking because the winds were coming out of 340 at 20, gusts to 40. And I realized at that moment I had no place to land them because the weather changed. And I got so panicked because I was only 23 years old and had all this responsibility that I realized that I needed to find an alternate. And I went to the flip. The old, we didn't have internet, we didn't have any of that. And I went to the flip and I found a runway at Mackahanish that was 360 degrees. They had a north-south runway, probably due to local effects. And I tried to call it up on the teletype to see what the weather observation was, and it was no report. And I'm thinking, how am I going to find out what the weather is doing? That's my only alternate. Or I have to bring them all the way back home, right? So I get the flip out, and I had to go through a telephone operator because, you didn't have phones back then. You could just talk to anybody in the world. And they had to patch me through to Mackahanish, and somebody answered the phone. And they said, nice Irish accent, top of the day to you, And I said, can I speak to the weather observer? And they said, oh, the weather observer's not here yet. I said, can I speak to the air traffic controller? Oh, air traffic control's not open yet. I said, who are you? He says, I'm the maintenance man. I said, okay, do me a favor. Could you look outside and tell me what you see? And he said, well, we have big puffy clouds, 2,000 broken. How far could you see? Oh, I could see forever, 7-mile visibility. And I knew the winds were blowing out of the north in that area, so I had my observation. And I called up and I said, your alternate is Mackahanish. Now, what's the lesson there? One is I probably did something I was too stupid to know I shouldn't have done, right? And I see, my FAA colleagues are here, and they go, oh, this is the guy we're working with to build a new weather standard. This is making me really nervous, right? But the bottom line was, what I learned from that day is all information is good information if you know where you're getting it from, you understand the risk around that information, the accuracy and the error rate, and you have a method or a means to vet it. And at that moment, I went through all those checks in my mind, and I made a risk-based decision. So fast forward now to 2023. Everything we're doing in this industry is about precision. We're going to have the best remote ID. We're going to have the best. We're going to make sure we can communicate with that aircraft at every moment it's in the air. We're going to know where they are. We're going to engineer these things to be able to operate autonomously. And I kind of view it like, okay, so now what are we going to do for weather? You know, we're going to use a 1990s, 1980s weather system to support this operation. It's going to be the longest pole in the tent. So when I saw that 4 or 5 years ago, I said, we've got to figure out a new way, because by the time everyone in the industry, after they're done with their, looking at their shiny objects and collecting their VC money, begins to realize that weather is going to be a very big impact to scaling your operations for beyond visual line of sight, especially autonomous operations where you don't have a pilot on the aircraft anymore, which, by the way, the pilot's the best weather sensor we've ever had. Nobody would argue here is the only reason why we allow us to fly at all in weather is because you have a pilot, because they're the ones you blame if something goes wrong, right? And they get a bad weather forecast, and they know they're going to have to deal with that, and they figure out how to deal with it. And that's part of the reason we have the safest air traffic, safest flying in the world, in the United States and everywhere else. We have a system. The system is really sound. It's based on rules. It's based on procedures. And now we have people using weather apps that nobody knows where the data is coming from to make decisions. So why is it that all our weather systems for Part 121 are so regulated and so managed, and everything is so important, but then we're using a weather app that nobody knows where that data is coming from? We don't know if it's secure. We don't know if that's a credible source of data. And if you think that there's really no choice, they have to do that. Why? Because the current aviation weather system isn't good enough for this industry. It was built for landing at airports. And just like Pavel was saying, his QNH, you know where those QNH readings come from when you're in the middle of nowhere? It comes from the nearest airport that may or may not even be relevant to where you're flying. So we write these rules and we say you have to use the nearest METAR. I prefer you don't even tell them that, because you know why? That METAR may not be relevant. Do you know a METAR is only relevant at the point the observation is taken? We like to say it's relevant for 5 nautical mile area, but that's only if you're lucky. I've been on runways. I was in Kunsan, sea fog. I had one half of the runway that was fogged in and the other half was clear, and that was on the same airfield. So we've got to stop deluding ourselves, and we got to take this challenge on, right? And that's what we're trying to do. So that's what ASTM has done. We're taking on the challenge of how do we bring a new framework to allow for better weather data, more weather data, to solve a problem that we all know we have, but we all don't like to talk about. The current weather systems out there, and by the way, just so you know, I was the Science and Technology Director at the National Weather Service, so I have some understanding of what I'm talking about. The other thing is I helped the FAA in 2005 write their next-gen weather ConOps. All right, so I do understand air traffic management. I understand all this stuff. I ran an Air Force base, by the way, in Kyrgyzstan. I ran outside of Bishkek. So I have a really good understanding of the ops, the weather, the technology. So let me just put that on the table in case anyone you guys wonder where I came from. So ultimately what we're talking about here is we have a lack of data below 5,000 feet. Everything you look at today that's not in an airport on a weather chart is a model. It's not real data. And that real data is uncertain. And the reason that it's uncertain to the extent it is we don't have enough data to measure below 5,000 feet. We do 2 balloon launches a day, and we have aircraft land at airports, and that's it. The rest of the world, we have no idea what's going on. We don't know what the cloud height is. We don't know what the visibility is. We don't know what the winds are doing at 300 feet, 5,000 feet. We estimate it based on the best models we have. And by the way, our models are amazing. It's a wonder of science that we could forecast as well as we do with so little data. But now it's coming back to roost, because now you want to fly in places that we don't have data, and you're flying lighter aircraft, and you're using battery-powered aircraft, and now the stakes go up, right? We have to get better at this. So how do we do that? How do we reduce the risk of knowing what's out there? How do we increase the certainty where there's uncertainty today? Because it's costing everybody money. I know that. Who's heard of the weather tax? Raise your hand. All right? Probably anyone that's seen me knows the weather tax, right? That's the price Mother Nature imposes on your business, whether real or perceived. And it's all local, like politics. It's based where you live. It's based on your geography. It's based if you live near water. And the weather tax is about 30% if you take an average. That means 30% of the time you're not flying because of weather, but not because of weather's actually happening. 30% or 40% of the time of that 30%, you're not flying because you don't know what's happening. And how many times have people gone out and said, I could have flown today, that weather guy really screwed it up? Well, that's because we didn't have data. So this standard is going to build a framework. It is a framework for us to go to a data performance standard. And it's going to be heavily regulated, the standard, because we have to make sure the data that's coming from sources that we're going to use, and it won't just be METARs, it could be crowdsourced data. If we know where it's coming from, how good it is, the metadata includes the information we need to know to make sure it's secure and reliable. And we have to get that data back into the FIMS. You have to get it into the FIMS, because if the private sector has data that we need for XATM or for these areas, we need to make sure that there's two-way flow of that information. Because if you have one part of the system depending just on the less granular government data only, and you're not getting that highly resolute data back into your FIMS, you've just defeated the whole purpose of this standard, right? And that's the things we have to test, right? So what does this standard mean? It really is allowing a free market to develop where today government has dominated. And there's a lot of technology out there that's been trapped in labs and universities that we're demonstrating. True Weather is, with our partner Metro Weather and others, that we know the business case exists to get better infrastructure out there. The drone air taxi business is the best business case we've ever had for micro weather, because now there's going to be a big need for it if you want to make more money, if you want to fly safely, if you want to reduce your risk, if you want your SORA to come out with a better rating. Oh, wait, we can't yet because weather is not in SORA. Oh, why is that? Because weather is not a mandatory service in U-Space. Oh, why isn't weather a mandatory service in U-Space? Because nobody knew what to do with weather. It was easier just to put it off, right, Amit? You remember that? Remember those conversations? Well, now we got a standard. So you can't put it off anymore. Now you have something you could deal with it. And what we want to see is we want to see this standard get into the SORA eventually. Now, is the standard perfect right now? No, it's not perfect. It needs to get better. And we're going to collect data. We're already working with NASA and the FAA on this. We're going to collect data. I want to work with Canadians. I want to work with the Swiss. We can bring this concept across the board. And what we're really talking about here is it could be the biggest change in aviation weather services since the Doppler weather radar was introduced in the 1990s, because data is going to be king, and we need more of it if you're going to be effective. So how do we bring third-party weather providers into the fold? How do we ensure it's reliable and secure data? How do we ensure that it's trusted? If we don't, we're going to an era of digital flight. There won't be humans looking at everything anymore. That weather data better not have been spoofed. It better not have been spoofed. Because as a former military guy in 24 years, I know how to mess up a war by spoofing weather data. I really do. And I can mess up your air traffic by spoofing weather data. So we have to be serious about weather. It's not a joke anymore. Weather is serious stuff. And we need to come up with the methods and means of compliance. We got to work with the CAAs and the ANSPs, and we've got to look at this new way of doing weather in the future. And in the end, it's going to be about public-private partnership, because the private sector is going to invest in this, because the business model is there, but we have to unleash this. And that means we got to change the rules, and we've got to take it on as a serious. And that's what ICAO is allowing me to speak about, because we got to harmonize this. We got to harmonize this. We got to take an approach to it that everyone can understand and take advantage of. Thank you.